Club's second selection for December was Eat Joy, Stories and Comfort Foods from 31 Celebrated Writers. The description on the back is that this collection of intimate illustrated essays by some of America's most well-regarded literary writers explores how comfort food can help us cope with dark times. My TLDR tagline for this book is that it's the existential version of chicken noodle soup for the soul. It's really, what did you eat at your lowest moments is what this kind of encapsulates. They are bite-sized memoirs of your darkest times. Overall, I think this was a good book. Like, I would, if I was going to give it a Goodreads rating, I would probably give it 3 stars, which is, it seems low, 3 out of 5 stars, but 3 stars is, and I like it, and I like the book, but like 4 stars, for instance, is a solid book that I could recommend to most people. This is 3 stars, and I would recommend it like only to casual readers, really. It's very difficult to review a collection of short stories because there's so many of them, and it doesn't have like a unifying plot or anything like that that you can comment about. But it's good for very casual reading. The advantage of it is that if there is a writer that you're really interested in, after reading their short story, then it's a way for you to be introduced to their body of work and then possibly go on to read one of their full-length novels on the strength of the short story that they had. So probably why I'm giving it a 3 star is that I didn't read a single one of these stories and was convinced that I should read more from any of these authors. Like, nothing really jumped out to me as like really beautiful and poignant. Like, my favorite story has to have been Lev Grossman's story, and that's because like I already am familiar with Lev Grossman, and the inclusion of his short story was very distinctly in his style, except it was personal, it was quirky, it was funny, it was interesting, and had a, like, it was good. Whereas a lot of the other ones are just kind of like, I don't know, it's just like a rumination of, what people were feeling and what they were eating, which again is a really good premise and could be incredibly personal. It's very, very relatable, but nothing in this collection super stuck out to me. On the other hand, this book actually really worked for me, and I think it was literally only because of the time that I was reading it, which was like right around the holidays. This was the December pick, and so I was traveling from New York, where I've been living for the past 3 years, back home to California, where my family is based, and I hadn't seen some of my extended family for the 3 years since I've been here. Like, some of them had come out for my graduation and things like that, and some, like, my main family has come out to see me for like holidays or vacations and things like that, but I hadn't seen some of them in person for 3 years. And so I had that feeling of transition that a lot of these stories talk about, where you kind of like catch up with your family and like you only get the highlights, and really those highlights are only the really, really high highs of like somebody's graduating and somebody's getting married and things like that, and then only the really, really low lows, which is somebody's health is declining, or they've changed since you've been away. There has been, things that you've missed out on that maybe you would have wished that you hadn't. And so like I was going through that, as well as the holidays usually bring such a thing up, which is you have serious talks with your loved ones about where you are in your life. And so I had that with my family, but I was also in the process of like having a major communication with my partner about how we'd like to organize our relationship in the future, and we were doing it long distance. So it was like really like some of the ones that had to do with relationships in it, especially long sleeves, like really hit me, where in long sleeves it opens up with this girl who's been a vegetarian for like since the duration of her relationship, but like during Valentine's Day she buys a hunk of pork, never having made pork in her life before, and is just kneeling on the floor trying to trim this like pork shoulder out of desperation on Valentine's to make this relationship work. And like I was like totally feeling it, where I was just kind of like, yeah, sometimes you think that's what you have to do, is you kneel on the floor and brutalize a dead piece of flesh to try and make it work. Like I very much felt that. So I do have like quite a few little stickies and notes for this book, and it's not because, and I think it was really, again, to compensate for the fact that there's a lot of these little short stories in it, and I felt like if I didn't put something down or if I didn't take a note, I'd completely forget it. Usually what these little tabs were, like my favorite tabs of what I remember from this book, or like what I thought was a mark, is actually small asides in italics that the author is having in terms of like little thoughts or asides to the reader, and those were the best ones. And my favorite aside is the one from Lev Grossman's story, where he goes back to the place where he's been buying trash takeout Chinese, and the lady who works there greets him. I was so surprised that she could speak English that I temporarily forgot how to speak English myself. I just smiled and waved and made some gesture along the lines of, what can you do? These things happen. I couldn't stay depressed and divorced forever. Eventually I had to eat some non-comfort food, but I'm really grateful for all the comfort food you made me. I hope she understood. Yeah, I like these asides. I think mostly because the most important things, like like sometimes what's most important are the things that go unsaid, unfortunately. And in the real world, we never get to have or like any knowledge of what has been unsaid, more or less. So the beauty of fiction is sometimes you can read into the motivations of characters or people that you never get to have in real life. So some of the other tabs that I've got in here, this one isn't an aside, but I liked, which was Comfort with Eggs by Laura Vandenberg. And it goes, I can remember her pulling the frittata from the stove and setting the cast iron pan on a hot plate in the center of the table. I can remember adding, learn to offer substance to yourself and to others in time of crisis, or really at any time at all, to my goals for being an actual adult list. And in terms of themes about food, I totally vibe with this. Like, to really thrive as an adult, I think that passing barrier between being able to keep yourself alive, aka being an adult, and being a thriving adult is if you can also put on a pretty decent like dinner party. Like, it sounds pretentious, but at the same time, don't be the freeloader. Like, don't be the freeloader at potlucks. Nobody wants to be the freeloader at potlucks. Nobody thinks well of you. But if you can, if you can contribute a good dish, like you're thriving. You are winning at adulthood. This one was one that I actually thought had a really evocative piece of language, especially uniting between the writing and the food. And it was by Anthony Doerr in Homesick at the Outer Edge of the World. I sit on the bottom stair and swipe a finger through the brownie batter. As soon as it touches my tongue, time and space collapse. Trees dip, waves crash. I taste the adolescent longing to be elsewhere, pinioned against the craving for the comforts of home. I think the reason why I really like that passage is because it's the closest to what I kind of wanted from this book overall, which was I like stories about food. I also read a lot of chefs' memoirs, and I actually own quite a few cookbooks that are like half memoir. And the way cooks talk about food is that they know the stories behind food and how those stories really unite with them. And this is especially true of ethnic chefs. They have connections to the foods they grew up with and the foods surrounding them, and they know that all of those stories become a part of the chef they are today. And so those are beautiful ruminations of food. There is that. It is existing, but I just don't feel that these writers really had the background in food or cookery to kind of centralize food as a story. It was very much about them, and so it was, I don't know, it wasn't for me. It wasn't the right flavor for me, if you will. I would prefer stories about food rather than stories about writers who eat food. For a short story to really land, you need usually a really good closing line. And you get a really evocative one from Chantal Acevedo's Merenguitos. Some nights, however, when Abuelo had gone to sleep early, and when the Miami traffic was light on the way home, she'd call me into the kitchen, her once domain with 2 eggs in hand. "Venasa, mi vida," she would say, her sweet tooth and mind beckoning, the hurricane strength in her arm winding up, whipping, frothing, and making sweetness out of what was bitter and hard to swallow. That is a really strong end line that, really wraps up everything that the rest of the story was trying to say. Okay, last but not least, I did mark out some recipes that I am actually interested in keeping and maybe trying myself. Actually, a lot of the recipes in here are not complicated chef's recipes. They aren't the thing that you're going to impress friends and family with. They're almost, again, things that you feed and nurture yourself with, right? Comfort foods. And usually comfort foods are trash, so I kind of enjoy these very, very honest sort of recipes that are nonetheless so special to people, because everybody has one, right? And this one is, you are 10 and tender and can only make this one thing, mac and cheese. And it's just, a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese, but also you add tomato soup and hot dogs in it, so it's like a one little pop meal. And I kind of like it. The last line of the recipe, because it's just make it how you want it, is think about your past self with compassion. She got you here after all. The only thing that I'm really excited about trying from this set of recipes is Indian style shrimp with gin. And that just sounds awesome. I would have never known that dish. This is not something I've ever encountered in the wild, so I'm really curious to try that flavor profile. So in conclusion, I would recommend this book to mostly casual readers. I think people who just want something quick but also thought-provoking would really enjoy this book. Would I read more books like this? Probably not. Personally, it just didn't work for me as a book. On another note with what doesn't work is that I really think for the tone that this book has, The artwork, although I really like it as a style on its own and a piece of design, I actually think these are really gorgeous and are wonderful prints. On the other hand, it does not really go with the tone of this book. The book is like about grief and loss, and having seen lots and lots of cookbooks and really admire how food porn has created a lot of like really great food photography, that this was not the way to go for your book about existential crises. So that is it for me and Eat Joy. I can't wait to see what the next selection for January in the new year is going to be, and I am going to be working on a couple of other videos, including like a wrap up of what I remember reading for all of 2019 and using it to kind of explain how my rating system for books goes. And then also I'll do a wrap up of everything else that I read during the holidays, including the first Troy Book Club selection and everything I read in between. So I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you keep reading with me.